Court will recognize the state of Mississippi for opening statement.
Good afternoon. As Judge Tatum told you yesterday, my name is John Champion, and I'm the district attorney for Panola County, where we are now, DeSoto County, Tate County, Yallowbush County, and Tallahatchie County, just everything up and down, basically down I-55. This is the part of the trial that we call opening statements, which is where I intend over the next little while to lay out for you what this case is going to be about and what we expect the evidence to show in this case. I do want to reiterate something that Judge Chatham just told you. And I've been doing this almost 25 years, and I've had many jury trials. And invariably, at the conclusion of a trial, sometimes the jurors, while they're deliberating, will say, hey, can we see a copy of the testimony of so-and-so witness that Kathy is taking down right now? I want to reiterate what the judge just said, and that will not be available to you. So the one thing that not only do we ask of you, and I'm sure the defense lawyers will ask of you, is to please pay attention. And please listen to what these witnesses are going to say. I anticipate that we're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of around 35 witnesses. We've been working really hard with the defense team over the last several months, and we were able to whittle the number of witnesses down from a much higher number to where we are now with some things that we have stipulated to which Judge Chatham at some point will read you what those stipulations are. Okay? I want to start by telling you that on December the 6th of 2014, Jessica Chambers was a beautiful, blonde-haired 19-year-old. She lived in a community that's about 6 to 7 miles due south of here called Cortland. Now, Cortland's like a lot of communities I'm sure you have in Pike County, that there aren't many people there, and basically everybody knows everybody. And that's the way that Cortland is. It was back in those days, and it still is today. A very small community. About 2 weeks prior to December the 6th of 2014, Jessica met a man that would eventually end her life. She met a man that would change the course of her family, that would change the course of the rest of the life of her family and her friends and everyone that knew her. And that man is Quentin Tellis. She met Quentin through a young lady you'll hear from here in a little while named Keisha Myers. And Jessica and Keisha and Quentin were all friends. They hung out together. Not a lot. And you'll hear Quentin tell some officers in some statements that he made that they would ride around, which is common. I mean, I remember I was growing up, when you're living in a small community like Oxford back in those days, that's what you did. You rode around. Just not a lot to do. And I'm sure all of us at some point in our lives did the same thing in these small communities. And Jessica, on the morning of December the 6th, woke up. She called Quentin Tellis and said, hey, we'll get together. She picked Quentin up at a place, well, at his residence, which is, there's an area there. You'll see that when we go out on the field trip to show you the areas that you're going to hear about. You're going to hear about a lot of these areas from me here in the next few minutes. But on Highway 51, which runs right out of here and heading south, runs into Cortland. And at Cortland, there is a store called M&M's Grocery. M&M Grocery has video cameras. Across the street from M&M Grocery is the residence of Quentin Tellis' mother. In front of that residence is a shed. And it's near Highway 51. The residence that I'm talking about is just the driveway runs right off Highway 51. The cameras from the store actually show the driveway where Quentin lived and also an adjacent driveway, which will become important in this case later on. So Jessica picks up Quentin at his residence, and they begin to ride. And remember, this is Saturday morning. They go to Keisha Meyer's house, which is not real far away, and they pick Keisha up, and they ride around, probably around 30 minutes. But one interesting thing that Quentin Tellis told the officers when he was interviewed was that they went by the scene where Jessica was found twice. It's a very remote scene. And I'll get to that in just a minute. As I want to take this as chronologically as best as I can for y'all. They ride around, and eventually Quentin gets out of the car back at his residence, and Jessica goes home. You will hear her mother testify, she'll be our first witness, that Jessica came home and took a nap, and that she woke up late in the afternoon, and she began to call and text Quentin. The one thing I want you to keep in mind is that she was also trying to get a hold of her friend Keisha, because Keisha will tell you that they had plans for that Saturday night, and December the 6th was a Saturday. But she couldn't get a hold of Keisha, and Keisha will tell you that she had one of those minutes phone where you have to pay for your minutes, and that she had run out of minutes, so her phone wasn't working. So Jessica was unable to get a hold of Keisha to find out what they were going to do and where they were going to go. So she contacts Quentin Tellis. And Quentin picks her up, or she picks Quentin up around 5:30 in the afternoon, and they begin to ride again. And they end up in Batesville, right here where we are now. As y'all came in yesterday, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a Taco Bell and some restaurants right as you got off the interstate, right near the interstate area. They end up going to Taco Bell and getting some food. They then drove back to Quentin's house. Now, Quentin will tell you in the statement that he gave the police that they parked in his driveway. But the cell phone data, which I'm going to get into here in a little while, shows that they were at an area just south of his house. And you're going to hear some terminology called RTTs, cell site location, cell location data. And we've got an expert that's going to explain all this to you, and I'll give you just a little bit about what that means right now. As we're sitting here, if you're not using your phone, it is sending a signal to the tower, if it's on, kind of just telling it where it is. Okay? Now, there are towers all over the place here in Batesville, so when we try to get cell site or the location of the phone, it's a lot more accurate because there are more phone towers here in town. As you get into Cortland, depending on who your provider is, you might have only, and there was a tower in Pope, which is just south of Cortland, and there's a tower in Batesville that controlled AT&T. All right, Verizon actually has a tower in the Cortland area along with the towers in Pope and the towers in Batesville. Okay, and it's easy for experts in cell phone analysis to be able to determine where you are, maybe not precisely where you are, but within a general very close range based on the signals that your phone is sending to the tower. Now, every tower has 3 120 degree. Everybody knows a complete circle is 360 degrees. The towers are broken into 120 degree segments. Okay? So when these cell phone experts are able to look at the data they're getting from the subpoenas that we did in this case, they can tell you what tower and what sector that phone is actually located in. Okay? You're going to hear all of this about it, and I've gotten off the beaten path a little bit. But when I said a minute ago that the cell phone data was showing that they really weren't at Quentin's house, but a driveway that sits next to his house that leads up in the back to a trailer. Okay? We knew who lived in that trailer, and it was a friend of Quentin's sister, and his sister stayed there sometimes. So we know where all the parties are located, and all of this is also covered by the cameras that are located at M&M's. All right, everybody following me on this so far? So we know that around 6:30 that Jessica and Quentin's phones are both hitting at a site just south of his house. We know that at 7:26, we're going to show you the video. Now, it's dark and you can't see the cars, but you can see the lights. That at 7:26, a set of headlights leave that driveway area and turn south on Highway 51. We also know that at the exact same time, Jessica's phone begins to move in that same direction. If you go less than a mile from his residence and his or the driveway next to his residence, if you go less than a mile and you turn back to the west, you're on what they call Main Street in Cortland. And you go due west, and Main Street turns into what they call Heron Road. And there's a site on Heron Road where there's a gate that leads back into some hunting camps. And we all know, and I'm sure they got them all over Pike County, you got hunting camps that folks like to go to when deer season starts and things like that. It's very similar here. There is a hill on the bank of that drive leading into that hunting camp in which Jessica's car was pulled up an embankment and jammed up basically between the fence and a tree. We know that at 8:04, 8:06, a phone call is made from a man named Glenn Williams, who you will hear from him today. He calls, or a gentleman with him calls the Panola County Sheriff's Department and says, hey, there's a car on fire. So the Cortland Fire Department is about a mile and a half from this scene. And the scene I'm talking about where the car was on fire was jammed up in the trees I just told you about, on the drive leading up into the hunting camp. You'll see this when we go out there. We know the phone call is made. Cortland is toned out. Their volunteer fire department is. And you're going to hear from all of the first responders that made that scene. You're going to hear from firefighters, not only from Cortland, but from Pope, which is just down the road. You're going to hear from the paramedics who made the scene and made the decision when they were treating Jessica that she needed to be flown out immediately. But what you're going to hear is that when Glenn Williams calls in the fire and the first responders get there only a couple of minutes later, because they were already there at the fire department after they'd just gotten off another call. When they get there, the first two will tell you, we looked up and we saw a girl walking towards us wearing nothing but bra and panties. Or it looked like bra and panties. As she got closer to them, all she had on was panties. They got freaked out a minute because they had no clue what was going on. Because that call that came in was just about a car fire. It didn't involve a person. They back the truck down the road a little bit, and a second truck arrives, and you'll hear from Cole Haley, who will tell you that the girl walked towards them, and they could tell immediately that she had been severely burned. They put her down on the ground. They begin to cover her up, and other first responders are beginning to arrive. This will be the point in the trial where you're going to probably start thinking to yourself internally, why are we here? Because why are we here? Because they asked Jessica, who did this to you? Because it was obvious this wasn't a wreck. Okay? And the things I tell you, man, she was wearing her bra and panties. Now, who's going to have a wreck wearing your bra and panties? You know, I guess it could happen, but it's December the 6th. And the first responders begin asking her, who did this to you? And you're going to get a somewhat variety of responses. Okay? But the common theme was it sounded like she said Eric or Derek. Okay? That's not his name. His name is Quentin. But the one thing that I want you to please do not make a judgment at this point until you've heard every bit of this evidence, because it will change your mind. I can promise you that. It will change your mind when you hear everything. But the first responders think they hear her say Eric or Derek. I want you to look closely at the photographs of Jessica, and they're not pretty, folks. I'm going to tell you that right now. Of her that were taken of her at the scene. She was burned over 93% of her body. Horrific burns, horrific pain. I would venture to guess that if all of us sitting here were to know we're going to die, that the very last way that we would want to die would be by fire. But Jessica was set on fire. So her condition at the scene is not like me talking to you right now. Her condition at the scene was her mouth was severely burned. You can see that in the photographs. We're going to unfortunately have to show you a photograph of her esophagus that was taken at the autopsy that will show it to be soot-lined, where she was inhaling the fire. Okay? So you will hear all of the first responders that came there, and you will hear from the two paramedics that will tell you that we knew right away that she was extremely critical, and we had to get her out of there as fast as we could, so they called for the helicopter. The helicopter arrives, and they fly her to the regional medical center in Memphis, where they have one of the best burn units in the country. And she was flown to the regional burn center in Memphis, which is about 50 miles north of here. You will hear from a young lady named Mary Beth Hall, who's a nurse practitioner that works in the burn unit, who was there with the treating physician when Jessica was brought in, and they knew immediately there was absolutely nothing they could do for her. There was no way that she was going to survive the burns that she suffered. They actually wrapped her up in an effort to ease as best they could the family's pain that was going to exist when they saw her. Mary Beth was in constant contact with the head of the burn unit, a Dr. William Hickerson, who you will hear from as well, that will describe for you the effect that these burns had on her and why there was no way that she was going to survive the burns, and she didn't. She arrived there at roughly 11 o'clock, and she passed away roughly 2:30 on Sunday morning, December the 7th of 2014. Obviously, an investigation began, and you'll hear from Edward Dixon. You're actually going to hear from two deputies who were there on the scene with Jessica. And then you're going to hear from Edward Dixon, who is an investigator with the Sheriff's Department, who will testify that while they were at the scene, they found a piece of a bra, and it was a very small piece of a bra. That was collected as evidence, and subsequently it was sent to the ATF lab in Atlanta, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm lab in Atlanta, where you'll hear from a guy named Matthew Simon, who will tell you that the substance on the bra was gasoline. You're going to hear also from a fellow named Jerry King. Now, Jerry King lived down the hill, and we'll stop there on our trip out to the scene to show you where. But it's roughly an eighth of a mile from the scene where Jessica was burned and where she was located. They found her keys to the vehicle laying off the side of the road. Jerry King found them. He calls the Sheriff's Department, and Tyler Mills from the Sheriff's Department responds and collects the keys. Those keys were submitted to a place in Jackson called Scales Biological Laboratory, where they were tested for DNA. There was a mixture of DNA found on the keys, 1/8 or even further a mile from where Jessica was burned, and Quentin Tellis' DNA is on those keys. His DNA is on the keys. The investigation begins. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation is called in to assist the Pinal County Sheriff's Department. ATF is called in from Oxford. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Oxford renders, they have technological expert. You'll hear from him. You'll hear from him for a long time in this trial. But all of their expertise was given to us in this case. On December the 10th, Quentin Tellis was brought in for questioning. He told the Sheriff's Department investigator, Barry Thompson, who you will hear from, and he also told an NBI investigator named Tim Douglas, who you will hear from, that he had been with Jessica that morning and he had not seen her the rest of the day. That he didn't talk to her the rest of the day. This was 3 or 4 days, basically 3 days after Jessica died. He also said that he was in in Batesville, where we are right now, right down the road down here, buying what we call a green dot card. I didn't know what a green dot card was before this case started, but it's like Western Union. You can send money. Basically, you pay for it, and somebody on the other end can upload money onto a credit card, similar to a Visa, and transfer money. He told us that he was in Batesville buying a green dot card, and he was sending money to his girlfriend in Monroe, Louisiana. And the FBI came in the case the second week, and we were doing follow-up interviews, and they decided they wanted to go and talk to Quentin again. So they go to his residence, and they begin to talk to him. But two very, very interesting things, and I want y'all to please remember this. Two very interesting things come out of the conversation between Quentin and the FBI. Number one is he admitted that at some time prior to her death that he had had sex with Jessica. The FBI asked him where, and he's pointed out the area right next to his residence, where I told you earlier, remember, that the phones were hitting right before Jessica died. He told the FBI that's where they had sex. He was asked about the position, because it was a small car, how did they do it? And And he said, well, we did it in the passenger seat with the seat laid back. Guess how the seat was laid back when investigators found the car at the scene? The seat was laid back. They then started talking about his modes of transportation, and he told the FBI at the scene that he kept a dirt bike in the shed in front of his house. And you will see that shed. But more interesting, and I told you there were two things to please remember. One was he pointed out the scene where they had sex. Second of all, he walked the FBI in and said, hey, I got a 5-gallon can of gas right here. What did I tell you was the substance that was used to pour on Jessica? It was gasoline. He also told the FBI the same story about going and getting the green dot card. So the FBI actually goes to Batesville. They locate him on the video, buying the green dot card, photograph it. You'll see that. So at this point, Quentin goes off of the radar. And this is in January, December and January of 2014 into 2015. This case goes on, and we had numerous leads during the course of this investigation that we really felt we had solved the case. We went to Iowa. We went to Aberdeen and Amory. We went to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Multiple places that we went thinking that we had really, really, really solid leads. Every single one of them fizzle out. In September, October of 2015, the analyst from the U.S. Attorney's Office began, he's been working with us the whole time. We had Scott here from ATF working with us the whole time. We had Tim Douglas from MBI working with us the whole time. Barry Thompson from the Sheriff's Department working with us the whole time. But this case turned when Paul began looking at the location data on Jessica's phone. And he realized that the location data wasn't quite accurate that we were getting from the cell phone company. Because he's got software where he can map these pings that the phone sends to, or we call them RTTs, that the phone sends to the tower. So Paul, being the incredibly smart person that he is, and I think you'll find that once you listen to him, because not only does he work for the U.S. Attorney's Office as an intelligence analyst, but he's also a colonel in the United States Air Force. And he deals with intelligence in the United States Air Force. He began looking at Jessica's location data and realized that it wasn't quite accurate. So he went and found places that we knew Jessica was, either by video or by witnesses. And that's when he learned that just how far, and it was a consistent off. And he actually just moved her RTTs to where we knew she was at a particular time. And guess whose RTTs she was right on top of? Quentin Tellis. Now, Portland's a small area. Could it have been I don't know what the word I'm looking for, accident, or could it be just the fact they were in the same area at the same time? So a decision was made to reapproach Quentin Tellis with the information that we had gathered from the cell phone data. We learned that he was living in Monroe, Louisiana. He had moved down there and had actually gotten married to the girl he sent the green dot card to. He had moved to Monroe. So investigators take a trip to Monroe, and Quentin agrees to talk with us. And he basically sticks with the same story, was I didn't see her after around noon. Well, we confronted him because by this time, not only did we have all of his cell phone data, which included his text messages, his phone calls, but we also had all of Jessica's text messages and all her phone calls. And it was very obvious to us they were communicating throughout the afternoon. And it was very obvious to us that she had intended to meet him that night, which had never been told to us when he was interviewed 3 days after Jessica died. And then another 10 days or 8 days later, when the FBI interviewed him, he never mentioned that. We found that curious. Hopefully you will as well. So during the course of the interview, he stuck to his story. And then Paul comes in and begins talking with Quentin and showing him the cell phone data. And all of a sudden, he realizes, wait a minute, they got me. I got to come up with a story now. So he changes completely his story in a very short amount of time to where he hadn't seen Jessica since they rode around earlier that day to, oh yeah. Because their phones were dead on top of each other at Taco Bell here in Batesville. He says, oh yeah, she wanted some weed, and I agreed to meet her up there. I took Big Mike's truck. I remember now, I left Cortland and I drove to Batesville, and I met her at Goody's, which is where she worked, and Goody's is right behind Taco Bell. When y'all are going back tonight to your hotel, if you're going out on Highway 6, before you take a left going toward your hotel, Taco Bell, Goody's, and all that's on your left. Okay, if y'all want to look at it when you go by. But he says, yeah, I remember now, I met her in Batesville. Sold her some weed, and I left. Didn't see her again. He said, I went down to an area called the Sandbox, which is a hangout area near Cortland. And he said, I hung around with Grip, who is Alexander Carr, okay, and then another guy named Terrence Shegog. He said, I was with them, they saw me. I was with Big Mike all day. I borrowed Big Mike's truck to go to Batesville to sell her the weed. Okay? So, fine. Hey, now we're getting somewhere. So we ended the interviews. This was in November of 2015, excuse me. I'm getting the years wrong. And we come back to Batesville, and investigators, who do you think the first three people the investigators brought in? Big Mike, Terrence Shegog, and Alexander Carr. The three people who were his alibi witnesses that he gave us during the interviews with him in Monroe, Louisiana. And Big Mike said, hell no, I wasn't with him. I was in Nashville, Tennessee. There is a player for the New York Giants named John Jerry who grew up here in Batesville. He and Mike are big buddies. They were playing the Tennessee Titans in Nashville. And he had gotten Big Mike tickets to the game and a hotel room. And Big Mike had left early in the afternoon that Jessica was burned to go to Nashville. And he went in the car that Quentin described to us. He wasn't anywhere near here. He was in Nashville. So, boy, our red lights are really going off now. We bring in Alexander Carr and Terrence Shegog, and we interview them. They said, man, I know who he is. I don't hang out with him. I was not with him at the Sandbox on the night that Jessica died. I wasn't there. He wasn't there. I wasn't with him. So now he's given us three alibi witnesses who have come in and said to us, this man is lying. We were not with him. So at this point, we really realized that we were on to something much more than what we were earlier. Not only was the cell phone data matching up as the two of them being together, and we had a mystery hour from 6:30 to roughly 7:30 when Jessica's phone was completely silent, except for one call that she made to her mother around 6:45. The interesting thing that Paul will tell you is that that exact same time frame, his phone was completely silent. And believe me, folks, they wore their phones out. Both phones, remarkably, at the same time, go silent. Well, to us, that indicated that she's with someone, he's with someone. And where do the RTTs and the phone data put each other, but right on top of each other at that exact same time period? So logic will tell you that the two of them are together right next to his residence from 6:30 to 7:30. When her phone begins to move west, we know for a fact that her phone was on the scene where she died at 7:30. 4 minutes later, when you will see the headlights come out of the driveway and head south. Now, a little tidbit of information I haven't told you about yet is we go back in January of 2016 to Monroe, Louisiana. And he is confronted a second time with the information that Paul gives him, that we have interviewed Big Mike, Terrence Shegog, and Alexander Carr, and all three of them said you weren't with him. Big Mike was in Nashville. And he says on the tape, oh yeah, Big Mike went to Nashville. Okay? Now we get to round 3 of his stories. He finally admits that Jessica came and picked him up around 5:30. He never mentioned that in the interview 3 days after it happened. He never mentioned in the interview 10 days or 8 days later when the FBI interviewed him. He never mentioned that in his first interview that we conducted with him in Monroe the first day. He never mentioned that the second day. Finally, when we go back at the end of January, he says, oh yeah, I was with her. He says, she picked me up and we drove to Taco Bell. Boom. Confirming the cell phone data that we had, that they were on top of each other in Batesville. He said, yeah, we then drove back to my house and were in my yard together. Boom. Confirms all the cell phone data that we had showing the two of them together. But this time there is no Big Mike. This time there is no Terrence Shegog. And this time there is no Alexander Carr. It's the two of them in her car. He claims in his yard, but the cell phone data shows it's right next to his yard, that the two of them are together. Now, he claims that Jessica left around 7 o'clock. We've got the video from the store that you will see that plenty of times that shows between 6:30 and 7:10, no one leaves that house or that area except for one person. And that's his Uncle Sammy. And Uncle Sammy drives directly across the street to the store. And you see him on video coming in the store. The next lights that leave either from his driveway or the one next to it are at 7:26 when her phone data begins to shift to the west. No one else leaves. We know his mama leaves at 7:38 and comes across the street to the store. That's on video. Okay? The next interesting thing that you will see is that at 7:50, a car pulls in, or a vehicle pulls into the shed in front of his house at 7:50. And it's there for 96 seconds. Remember when he interviewed the FBI? What did the FBI, or what they're going to tell you is that he showed them in that shed where this car parks that he had a can of gasoline in that shed. This was almost 2 years to the date after the FBI interviewed him that finally we see on the video a vehicle pull up to this shed. Well, we knew he wasn't in a car. So we began to wonder how in the world, or who that is. Well, he admits that around this time, you'll hear him say it in the interviews, he admits that around this time, he goes across the street to his sister's house. She lives a little bit down the road. His sister lives between where he lives and where Jessica was found. His sister lives between where the keys were found and where he lives. He admits going in there and borrowing her car. Now he says this is only the second time I've ever been in her or used her car. The first time was I took it to wash it for her sometime before. But he admits at about this time, for some reason, and he says the reason is to go to Batesville to buy the green dot. But he's not on camera until almost 8:30 buying the green dot. So we see a vehicle pull into the area where 2 years earlier he had told the FBI that I keep gas in there. That vehicle is there for 96 seconds. It backs out on Highway 51 and goes back south toward Cortland, towards the scene. We have a photograph that a few minutes after 8 o'clock from the store video of a white car, and his sister had a white, I think it's Yukon, going north. We see a white vehicle going north on the camera, and the investigators asked him during the course of the interrogation, could that be you? I think it was at 8:04. Could that be you going north on Highway 51? Because at 8:08, his phones transfer from the Pope Tower to the Batesville Tower, which means he is definitely coming north. And he tells the police, yeah, that's probably me in that car going to Batesville to buy the green dot. The car is going by, and you'll see it, at a high rate of speed, coming from the area where the crime scene would be located. And you got to understand, the crime scene is a good ways away. You go down 51, you take a right on Main Street, and you go out. It's about a mile, or a little over a mile, from where Jessica was found to his house. It's right at a mile from where Jessica's was found to his sister's house. A very short distance. And our theory of the case is that he left Jessica at the scene. And the one thing that Judge Chatham read to y'all yesterday, y'all remember when he read y'all the charges? When y'all were sitting in the room, he read you the indictment? Okay? The indictment says that with or without any design to affect the death of. Okay, and what that basically means under Mississippi law is that in a capital murder case, the state is not required to prove that he intended to kill. Only that a death occurred during the commission of another crime. All right, does everybody understand what I'm saying? We don't have to prove, and the greatest example is, say somebody's robbing a store, and a store clerk, or somebody fires a shot up in the air and hits somebody and kills them. There was no intent to kill that person, but someone died during the commission of that robbery. Okay, that is capital murder. Our allegation in our indictment, and what I expect Judge Chatham at the conclusion of this trial to instruct y'all on, is that the death occurred during the commission of third-degree arson, which is the automobile. You will see numerous text messages between Jessica and Quentin where he is constantly asking her for sex. And she is constantly turning him down. You will see this in the text messages. I don't know what happened inside that car at the side of his house, but some interesting things evolved from his interview with the FBI and the interview of where the seat, or the physical findings of where the seat was. He told the FBI that they had had sex in the passenger seat with the seat laid back. That's the exact position that seat was found in that night. The state is not required to prove motive. Do y'all remember, Jay, and y'all all assured us that you would not require us to prove a motive. Even though everybody wants one, we're not required to prove you one. And you're allowed to develop your own motive. When you think about what you hear in this case, you are allowed to develop your own motive. But I think what you're going to find, and I think it will be uncontradicted, is that there were these series of text messages between the two, even on the day that she died, or the day that she was burned. There were text messages where he's asking her for sex. And go back to what I told you, ladies and gentlemen, at the very beginning. How was she found at the scene? In a panties, and we found pieces of the bra because the bra had been burned off of her. So all she basically had on was a pair of panties. December the 6th, it's 40-something degrees. She's not going to be walking the roads of Pinova County wearing a bra in panties, or just panties. I mean, that's logical to assume, is it not? And the people at the Med will tell you as soon as they try to get the panties off, they just disintegrated because they were burned into her so bad. The panties just basically disintegrated. But the series of text messages where he is asking her for sex, and she's nice about it. You know, she's not abrupt about it. You know, she is putting him off. But what we do know for 100% certain is that he told the FBI where they had sex, next to his house. We know where he told everybody, or told them, the position of the seat. We know for a fact how the seat was found. You're going to see plenty of photographs of it. And we're going to know what she was wearing when they found her. I don't know what happened inside the car. And when I do my closing argument, I'll tell you what I think happened. Okay? I think he suffocated her and thought he had killed her. And that he had to get her away from his house. He wanted sex. You'll see the text messages where he wanted her. And that they end up, he drives to the scene that he'd already been by twice that day. That morning with Jessica and with Keisha. That he parks the car there, takes the keys with him, and runs. And as he's running towards his sister's house, he either drops the keys or throws them. Because what's the first thing, or one of the very first things I told you about those keys? His DNA is on those keys. That he runs to his sister's house, and we'll show you a couple of routes. We don't know the route, but there is a route that leads, as you're coming into Cortland, you cross some railroad tracks, and there's a road that runs back north. And there's some few residences down there, and if you run in the yards of those residences and come straight up a hill, you run right in the back of his sister's trailer. okay, that he is in a panic mode, that he borrows his sister's car. That's the vehicle we see pulling into his house at the shed where the gas is located, that we know he told the FBI. That he drives back to the scene, pours gasoline into the car, lights it up, and drives to Batesville to buy this green dot so that he would have an alibi of where he was. Another interesting thing you'll see is that his phone becomes active around 7:42, where he calls Jessica. Now remember, she had just left at 7:26 from his residence, where he admitted they'd been together. At 7:42, he calls Jessica, and then he sends her a text message saying, "Hey, honey, I can't be with you tonight. My girl's coming up." Something to that effect. Okay? Then, after that, he calls his girl in Louisiana. And then around 7:50, his phone goes dead again. No activity whatsoever. And his call to his girlfriend was made after the call and the text to Jessica. How in the world did he know his girl was coming up if he hadn't talked to her yet? First person he tried to get hold of was Jessica. Okay? And then he sends her a text saying, "Hey, my girl's coming up. I can't be with you tonight." Then he calls his girl. How in the world would he have known his girl was coming up when he sent the text message to Jessica if he hadn't even talked to her yet? Not since about 4 o'clock. And he was with Jessica some 16 minutes earlier. So that was an alibi text. That was a text to throw the police off saying, "Hey, well, why am I texting her if I'm killing her?" That's what that is. And when Paul testifies, we're going to have a PowerPoint for you that's going to tie all of this together. You're going to see all of these text messages. You're going to see all of the communications between the two of them. And remember, they'd only known each other 2 weeks. That's it. I know I've gone on and on and on here, but this is an extremely important case. Because anytime that somebody dies, and I noticed yesterday, and I've been doing this a long time, fixing to start my 25th year, and I've sat in front of a lot of juries in my day, and I saw the look I expected to see when y'all's names were called out yesterday. Saw a lot of different facial expressions. But the fact that each and every one of you are willing to serve is such a satisfying and appreciative of me or from me to you. Because we're asking you to give up the next week or so of your life so that we can make sure that the right thing is done. So that we can make sure that justice is served. Because he deserves a fair trial. And we have worked wonderfully with the law, with Darla and Alton on this case as far as making sure we had everything. We're not hiding anything wrong. We gave them everything we had. And they on the other side have been extremely cooperative with us. And we're all after the same thing. We're all after and hoping that justice will be served in some form in this case. And what that justice is will be up to you. The state submits right now that we're going to be able to show you every single thing that I have stood up here for probably close to the last hour talking about. That you're going to see all of this. This is not stuff that I made up. And that the investigators in this case worked to make sure that things were done the right way. so that when we come in here to you, we can present a case that you can reach a verdict on. And I submit to you that you're going to sit there and wonder when you hear these first responders, and I can't explain, but if you'll sit there and say, tell us, without trying to move your tongue, it sounds a lot like Eric or Derek. Was that what she was trying to say? Was she in such a state of shock? I can't answer that question, and that's going to be a question that I can't answer for you. All I can tell you is what these first responders thought they heard. But if you'll remember a little while ago, I said, I think we'll be able to change your minds when we start showing you the number of lies that he told and how he had to when he's confronted with the physical evidence, the cell phone data. There was no way out for him, none whatsoever. What are the chances that in less than 4 minutes she leaves his house and gets with somebody else? It's just not feasible. Just not feasible when you look at everything. Once we conclude this trial, I'll speak to you again, and we'll go over what you're going to hear over the next several days. And I firmly believe that once this case is concluded and y'all enter that room to begin deliberating, you will say, well, everything that Mr. Champion told us in the opening statement, he has shown you. And I believe that Quentin Tellis is guilty of capital murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you.